Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt journeys of love, resilience, and the extraordinary moments that define us. Today's story takes us through a profound tale of a couple whose love transcended distance, illness, and loss. It's a story of finding strength in the face of adversity, cherishing every fleeting moment, and discovering hope in the most unexpected places. As we dive into this emotional journey, we'll explore the enduring power of love and the lessons it leaves behind. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories and join us as we begin today's inspiring tale. Let me take you back to a morning etched in my memory, a moment so simple yet profound that it feels like both a treasure and a wound. It was 1 week before my wedding to Ryan, a man who had filled my life with laughter, dreams, and endless possibilities. The kind of love we shared wasn't the kind found in fairy tales. It was raw, genuine, and deeply human, woven together through trials, long nights, and countless flights between cities. That morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of birds outside the window of our small apartment. Ryan was already up, standing by the kitchen counter with a messy pile of toast and jam, humming quietly to himself. His broad shoulders seemed relaxed, his movements unhurried, a stark contrast to my restless heart. As I joined him, he looked up and smiled, his blue eyes crinkling at the edges in a way that always made me feel safe. We sat at the table, surrounded by the delightful chaos of an ordinary morning. Dishes were stacked haphazardly in the sink, crumbs scattered across the counter, and the faint warmth of the sunlight poured through the window. It was one of those mornings that long-distance couples learn to savor. Each moment together was a tiny rebellion against the miles that so often kept us apart. As we ate in comfortable silence, my mind wandered. My heart felt heavy, burdened by the bittersweet reality of our relationship. For years, we had built a routine of fleeting hellos and inevitable goodbyes. We lived on opposite sides of the country, me in Chicago and Ryan in Seattle. The distance, though manageable, often felt like a third entity in our relationship, testing our patience and our resolve. "Ryan," I said, breaking the quiet. My voice was steady, but inside, I was a storm. "I hate this pattern we've fallen into. I hate saying goodbye just when it feels like we're finally finding our rhythm." Ryan looked up from his coffee, his gaze meeting mine. In his eyes, I saw understanding, but also a quiet sadness that mirrored my own. He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and grounding. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too. But every time we're apart, it makes the moments we do have together mean so much more. Don't you think?" I wanted to argue, to tell him that love shouldn't have to be this hard. But as I looked at him, I saw the strength he carried for both of us. Ryan had always been the optimist in our relationship, the one who believed that love could conquer anything, even the miles that stretched between us. And maybe, in that moment, I needed to borrow some of his faith. "It's just hard," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I count down the days until we can be together again. But every time we say goodbye, it feels like a part of me stays behind with you." Ryan squeezed my hand gently and stood, moving to my side of the table. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his presence both comforting and steadying. "Claire," he said, his voice firm yet full of tenderness, "I choose you. 1,000 times. I choose you. And I'll keep choosing you, no matter how many goodbyes we have to face." His words were like a balm to my restless heart, and for the first time that morning, I allowed myself to truly believe in them. Ryan had a way of making me feel seen, even when I was lost in my own doubts. He painted a picture of a future where we would wake up together every morning, where goodbye would no longer be part of our vocabulary. I smiled, a mix of gratitude and love washing over me. "I'll always choose you too," I whispered, "even when it's hard." After breakfast, we stood together at the sink, washing dishes side by side. The sound of running water and the clinking of plates created a comforting rhythm. A soundtrack to our shared life. Ryan, always the one to lighten the mood, teased me about how I never folded towels the way he liked, or how I managed to sneak cheese into almost every dish I cooked. I laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. When we finally settled onto the couch, Ryan pulled me close, his arm draped around my shoulders. He spoke softly about his dreams for our future, living in the same city, building a home, and sharing a life where we wouldn't have to count the days until our next meeting. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and allowed myself to dream with him. In those quiet moments, surrounded by the love and promise of a future together, I felt a glimmer of hope. Ryan's optimism had a way of anchoring me, reminding me that even in the face of challenges, our love was worth fighting for. But as the day slipped away and the time for Ryan's departure loomed closer, the familiar ache of goodbye began to creep in. The drive to the airport was subdued, filled with stolen glances and hands held tightly, as if letting go would somehow shatter the fragile peace we had built that morning. Standing at the terminal, Ryan turned to me, his suitcase in hand. His eyes, usually so full of light, carried the weight of the moment. He held me close, whispering promises of love and a future where goodbye would no longer exist. And as I watched him walk away, disappearing into the crowd, my heart ached with the longing that only distance can bring. Looking back now, that morning feels like a beautiful dream, tinged with both sweetness and sorrow. It was the calm before the storm. The last moment of innocence before life would take us on an unexpected journey that neither of us could have foreseen. The days that followed Ryan's departure were filled with a mix of anticipation and restlessness. Our wedding was just a week away, and while my heart brimmed with excitement, there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite shake. Ryan's voice on our calls sounded steady, but there were moments of hesitation. Brief pauses where I felt as though he wanted to say something but held back. I chalked it up to pre-wedding nerves, convincing myself that everything was fine. But one night, as I flipped through wedding magazines in my small Chicago apartment, the feeling of unease bubbled to the surface. I thought about our last conversation, his quiet sighs and how he had quickly deflected when I asked about finalizing some of the wedding details. Something felt off. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel reassured by his words. My thoughts spiraled, and before I could talk myself out of it, I made a decision that would change everything. I would fly to Seattle to see him, unannounced. The next morning, I requested a day off from work, explaining to my boss that it was for something important. He agreed, his firm expression softening when he saw the urgency in my eyes. With his approval, I booked the earliest flight I could find, my mind racing with both excitement and apprehension. I imagined the look on Ryan's face when he opened the door to find me standing there, a surprise that would hopefully remind him of the love we were fighting for. When I arrived in Seattle, the city greeted me with its usual gray skies and a light drizzle, the kind of weather that felt oddly comforting. I took a cab to Ryan's house, my heart pounding with every mile. As we neared his quiet neighborhood, I practiced what I would say, rehearsing the words in my head. But when we pulled up in front of his house, I hesitated. The lights were on, and through the window, I saw Ryan pacing in the living room, his expression heavy with something I couldn't quite place. Steeling myself, I stepped out of the cab and walked toward the door. But before I could ring the bell, I heard voices. Ryan wasn't alone. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer to the window, just enough to hear the conversation. His mother, Linda, was sitting on the couch, her posture tense but composed. They were discussing something serious, something about the wedding. "I just don't think I can do this," Ryan said, his voice low but filled with anguish. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned closer, struggling to process his words. "The wedding, it doesn't feel fair to Claire. I can't ask her to go through this with me." My heart raced as I tried to make sense of his confession. What didn't feel fair? What was he talking about? Linda's response was calm but firm. Ryan. She loves you. You owe it to her to tell her the truth. She deserves to know what's going on. I don't want her to see me like this, he replied. His voice breaking. I don't want her to feel trapped or burdened by what's happening to me. Burdened. Trapped. The words echoed in my mind, heavy with implications that I couldn't yet grasp. I stumbled back, my hands trembling as tears blurred my vision. What could be so terrible that he would consider cancelling our wedding? Unable to listen further, I turned and walked back to the cab, my legs feeling like lead. The driver gave me a questioning look as I climbed in, but I couldn't muster a response. My mind was spinning with fragments of their conversation, each piece adding to the weight of my confusion and heartbreak. As the cab pulled away, I looked back at Ryan's house, the light from the window casting long shadows onto the street. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, and make him understand that whatever he was going through, we could face it together. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear of what I might hear, or fear that his love for me was no longer enough to sustain us. By the time I reached my hotel, exhaustion had taken over. I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as questions swirled in my mind. What had changed? Why hadn't he told me? And most painfully, was he already letting go of us? That night, sleep evaded me as I replayed the conversation over and over again, searching for clues in his words and hers. All I knew was that the man I loved was keeping something from me, and it was tearing us apart. I had come to Seattle hoping to reignite our connection, but instead, I found myself standing on the edge of an uncertain future, unsure if we could ever find our way back to the love we once shared. The next morning, I woke up feeling hollow, as if the conversation I had overheard had drained every ounce of certainty from my life. I wanted answers, but the fear of confronting Ryan, of hearing something I couldn't bear, kept me paralyzed. Instead, I stayed in bed, replaying the fragments of his words. What could he possibly be hiding that was serious enough to make him reconsider our wedding? Hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda, Ryan's mother. She had always been warm and kind, treating me like family from the moment Ryan introduced us. Her message was simple but direct. Claire, we need to talk. Can I come see you? I hesitated before replying, a mix of anxiety and hope coursing through me. Maybe she had the answers I was too afraid to ask Ryan for. Minutes later, I sent her the address of my hotel, and within an hour, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Linda stood there, her usually calm face etched with worry. She stepped inside and placed a hand on my arm, her touch gentle but firm. Claire, she began, her voice steady, though I could see the effort it took. I think you might have misunderstood what you heard last night. I motioned for her to sit, my heart pounding as I waited for her to continue. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't an easy conversation for her. Ryan didn't want you to know this, she said, her voice cracking slightly, but you deserve to know the truth. He's been diagnosed with leukemia, and it's serious. Her words hit me like a tidal wave, sweeping away the confusion and replacing it with a sharp, unbearable pain. Leukemia? I repeated, my voice barely audible. Linda nodded, her eyes misting over. He found out a few months ago. It's advanced. Claire, he didn't want you to see him suffer or feel like you were trapped in a life you didn't choose. I sat back, stunned. The pieces of last night's conversation began to fall into place. Ryan's reluctance, his talk of not wanting to burden me, it all made sense now. But along with the understanding came a wave of guilt. He had been going through this alone, carrying the weight of his illness in silence because he thought he was protecting me. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process it all. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered, my voice breaking. Linda reached for my hand. Her grip strong yet comforting. He thought he was sparing you. Ryan has always been selfless. Sometimes to a fault. He didn't want to take away your dreams. Your freedom. But I told him he was wrong. Claire. You deserve the choice. You deserve to know. My chest ached with a mix of sorrow and anger at Ryan for shutting me out. But also at myself for doubting him. He hadn't let go of us. He was trying to protect me in the only way he knew how. I need to see him, I said suddenly. The urgency in my voice surprising even me. I need to tell him that none of this changes how I feel about him. Linda's face softened. A small smile breaking through her tears. I thought you'd say that, she said. I'll take you to him. We drove in silence. The hum of the car's engine the only sound between us. My mind raced with thoughts of Ryan. Of the pain he must have been enduring alone. And of how I would convince him that we could face this together. When we reached his house, Linda placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder before leading me inside. Ryan was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard us, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as his eyes met mine. Claire, he said, standing quickly. What are you doing here? I took a shaky step toward him, my voice trembling but determined. Ryan, why didn't you tell me? His face fell. And he looked away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the question. I didn't want you to feel obligated to stay, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't bear the thought of you giving up your life for me. Tears filled my eyes as I closed the distance between us. You don't get to make that decision for me, I said, my voice firm despite the emotion choking it. You're my life. Ryan, don't you understand that? I would rather have one day with you than a lifetime without you. He looked at me then, his blue eyes glistening with tears. But I don't want to hurt you, he said, his voice breaking. You're not hurting me, I said, reaching for his hands. Keeping this from me, shutting me out, that's what hurts. Let me be here for you. Ryan. Let me love you. No matter how hard it gets. For a moment, there was only silence between us. The air thick with unspoken fears and love. And then, finally, Ryan pulled me into his arms, holding me as if letting go was no longer an option. In that moment, we both knew we would face this together. No matter what came next. Our love was strong enough to endure it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Ryan and I knew that time was no longer a luxury we could take for granted. The wedding, which had once been a distant dream on the calendar, became an urgent and immediate goal. We both agreed that no matter what lay ahead, we wanted to face it as husband and wife. Planning a wedding on short notice was a challenge, but it gave us a renewed sense of purpose. Linda threw herself into the preparations, her quiet strength and unwavering love for Ryan becoming a cornerstone for both of us. She managed to secure a small garden venue just outside Portland. A place Ryan had once mentioned reminded him of the summers he spent hiking with his family. The setting was perfect, lush greenery, vibrant flowers, and a serene pond that mirrored the sky. Ryan, though weakened by his treatments, was determined to be involved in every decision. Together, we picked out a simple yet elegant white dress for me and a navy suit for him. He joked about how he might look underdressed next to me, but his smile, even in its fragility, carried the same charm that had drawn me to him all those years ago. Amid the hustle of planning, Ryan and I found moments of quiet joy. One evening, as we sat on the couch with invitation cards scattered between us, he reached for my hand. Claire, he said softly, his eyes searching mine. Are you sure about this? About marrying me? Knowing everything that's ahead? I tightened my grip on his hand, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. Ryan, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're not just my fiancé, you're my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. His gaze softened, and he pulled me into a gentle embrace. I don't deserve you, he murmured, his voice heavy with emotion. You deserve everything, Ryan. I whispered back. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you believe that. The day of the wedding arrived with a crisp blue sky that seemed to promise new beginnings. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the lace on my dress, I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the emotions that were bound to follow. Linda appeared at the doorway, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You look beautiful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan is going to lose his breath when he sees you. I smiled, my heart swelling with gratitude for the woman who had become like a second mother to me. Thank you, Linda, for everything. She stepped closer, placing a hand on my cheek. Thank you for loving him, for standing by him when so many would have walked away. The ceremony was intimate, attended by close family and a handful of friends who had been part of our journey. As the soft strains of a violin filled the air, I walked down the aisle toward Ryan. He stood at the altar, his posture slightly frail but his eyes alight with a love that outshone everything else. When our eyes met, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Ryan's expression was a mixture of awe and overwhelming emotion, and I felt the same reflected in my own heart. The officiant's words were a blur, but I remember every moment of Ryan's vows. He spoke with a voice thick with emotion, promising to love and honor me for every moment we had left together. You are my heart, Claire, he said, his voice trembling. And no matter what happens, I will love you for all my days. When it was my turn, tears streamed down my face as I declared my own promises. Ryan, you are my strength, my joy, and my greatest love. I vow to walk with you through every challenge, to celebrate every victory, and to cherish every moment we share. As the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Ryan leaned forward, pressing his lips to mine in a kiss that was both tender and profound. The applause from our family and friends blended with the soft rustling of the trees, creating a symphony of love and hope. That evening, under the glow of string lights and a sky full of stars, we danced together for the first time as husband and wife. Ryan's arms around me felt like home, and for those precious moments, there was no illness, no fear, only love. The night was filled with laughter, heartfelt toasts, and the quiet joy of knowing we had chosen each other, no matter the odds. As we said goodbye to our guests and walked hand in hand back to the small cottage we had rented for the night, Ryan stopped and turned to me. This was the best day of my life, he said softly. I smiled, my heart full. Mine too, I whispered. And it's only the beginning. Little did we know just how fleeting our time together would be. But that night, wrapped in the warmth of our love, we allowed ourselves to dream of forever. After the wedding, Ryan and I embraced life with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to make every moment count. The days were slower now, more deliberate, and filled with a deeper appreciation for the simple joys that many take for granted. We didn't dwell on the uncertainty of the future. Instead, we focused on the beauty of the present. Ryan's health fluctuated. Some days, he was energetic and full of life, his laughter filling the air as if nothing could weigh him down. Other days, he was quieter, his strength sapped by the toll of his illness. But even on the hardest days, he never lost the light in his eyes, a constant reminder of the love and resilience that defined him. We found joy in the smallest things, cooking together, walking in the park, or simply sitting on the porch with cups of tea. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ryan turned to me with a mischievous grin. Claire, he said, his voice carrying a playful lilt, have you ever wanted to learn salsa dancing? I laughed, caught off guard. Salsa? Ryan, I can barely keep up with you on the dance floor as it is. He chuckled, his blue eyes sparkling. Come on. It'll be fun. Besides, I've always wanted to see what it feels like to sweep you across the floor. And just like that, our twice-weekly salsa lessons became a highlight of our lives. We stumbled over each other's feet, laughing until our sides hurt. But slowly, we found our rhythm. There was something magical about moving together to the vibrant beats of the music. Our bodies in sync and our hearts light. Another evening. As we sipped wine on the terrace, Ryan looked up at the night sky, a dreamy expression on his face. "Do you know what I've always wanted to do?" he asked. "What's that?" I replied, resting my head on his shoulder. "Camping under the stars," he said. "Just us. A tent. And the endless sky above. No city lights. No noise. Just quiet." I smiled at the thought. That sounds perfect. A week later, we found ourselves in a secluded campsite, the cool night air wrapping around us as we lay on a blanket beneath the stars. Ryan pointed out constellations, his voice soft and steady as he shared stories of childhood nights spent stargazing with his father. It was in moments like these that I saw him at his most vulnerable and his most alive. A man determined to embrace every ounce of wonder the world had to offer. But the joy of these moments was always tinged with the knowledge of what lay ahead. Ryan's condition was progressing, and the weight of his illness was becoming harder to ignore. We talked openly about it, no longer shying away from the reality we faced. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Ryan broke the comfortable silence between us. "Claire," he said, his tone serious, "there's something I need you to promise me." I turned to him, setting down the dish in my hand. "Anything," I said, my voice steady. "When the time comes," he began, his gaze locking onto mine. "Don't let this define us. Don't let my illness overshadow the life we've built or the love we've shared." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I nodded, reaching for his hand. "I promise, Ryan," I said softly, "I'll carry our love with me. Always." As the weeks turned into months, we continued to create memories that would last a lifetime. We danced in the living room, the music barely audible over our laughter. We sat by the fireplace on cold evenings, sharing stories and dreams. And through it all, we held on to each other with a love so fierce and unyielding that it felt like a shield against the storm. Ryan's strength inspired me daily. Even as his body grew weaker, his spirit remained unbroken. He found beauty in the smallest things, a flower blooming in the garden, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth of my hand in his. It wasn't a life without pain or challenges, but it was a life full of meaning, a testament to the power of love and resilience. And as I lay beside Ryan each night, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I knew that no matter how much time we had left, we had already lived a lifetime's worth of love. The months after our wedding were filled with both beauty and heartbreak. As Ryan's health declined, the urgency to savor each day grew stronger. We spent our time revisiting old memories and creating new ones, leaning into the love that had always been our foundation. Every moment felt precious, a fleeting gift we cherished as if it might slip away too soon. Ryan's favorite place was the park near our home. On sunny days, we would pack a small lunch and sit beneath the towering oak trees, talking for hours. On one of those afternoons, he reached for my hand and smiled faintly. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked, his voice soft but full of warmth. I nodded, the memory clear as day. "You spilled coffee all over my favorite dress," I teased, laughing softly. "You were so embarrassed." But I couldn't stop laughing. He chuckled, his laughter tinged with the weariness that had become a part of him. "I thought I'd ruined everything that day. But instead, you told me it was the best date you'd ever had." "It still is," I said, squeezing his hand gently. As his illness progressed, Ryan became more open about his fears. One evening, as we lay on the couch wrapped in a warm blanket, he turned to me, his expression serious. "Claire," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to know how much you've given me, more than I ever thought possible." I swallowed the lump in my throat, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You've given me just as much, Ryan. You've shown me what love truly means." He smiled, though tears glistened in his eyes. Promise me you'll keep living. Even after, his voice trailed off, and I could feel the weight of what he was trying to say. I promise, I said firmly, my heart breaking but my resolve unwavering. But don't you think for a second that you won't always be with me. You'll be in every memory, every decision, every moment. Ryan nodded, a small smile breaking through his sadness. That's enough for me. In his final days, the house was filled with a quiet stillness, broken only by the sound of soft music or whispered conversations. Linda stayed with us, her presence a source of comfort for both Ryan and me. Together, we ensured that he was surrounded by love, his days filled with as much peace and joy as we could provide. On a crisp autumn morning, Ryan asked to visit the park one last time. Wrapped in a warm coat and seated in a wheelchair, he gazed at the world around him with a look of quiet reverence. It's beautiful, isn't it? He said, his voice tinged with awe. It is, I replied, my hand resting on his. But not as beautiful as the life we've shared. He turned to me, his blue eyes filled with love. Thank you, Claire, for everything. Later that evening, as the sun set and the room filled with the soft glow of lamplight, Ryan slipped away peacefully. I held his hand until the very end, whispering words of love and gratitude, my tears falling freely. In his final moments, I saw not pain but serenity, as if he was finally free from the burden he had carried for so long. The days after Ryan's passing were a blur of grief and quiet reflection. The house felt emptier without his laughter, his presence a palpable absence that weighed on me. But in the stillness, I found solace in the memories we had created, the salsa lessons, the stargazing, the quiet nights by the fire. His love was a part of me, a beacon of light in my darkest hours. 3 weeks later, a faint glimmer of hope entered my life. I had been feeling unwell and decided to visit the doctor. Sitting in the sterile office, I braced myself for the news. When the doctor confirmed that I was pregnant, a flood of emotions washed over me. Joy, sorrow, and gratitude swirled together as I realized that a part of Ryan would live on through our child. I called Linda that evening, my voice trembling as I shared the news. On the other end of the line, she broke into tears, her cries a mixture of heartbreak and joy. Ryan would be so happy, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This baby is a miracle. The months that followed were a journey of healing and anticipation. With Linda's unwavering support, we transformed a small room in my house into a nursery, filling it with touches of Ryan, his favorite books, his beloved photographs, and a painting of the park he loved so much. When my son was born, the moment was both bittersweet and transformative. As I cradled him in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to Ryan. Welcome to the world, Dylan, I whispered, naming him in honor of his father. In Dylan's eyes, I saw Ryan's blue gaze staring back at me, a constant reminder of the love we had shared. Though the pain of losing Ryan would never fully disappear, the joy of raising our son gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Together with Linda, we built a life filled with love, honoring Ryan's memory and ensuring that his legacy would endure. As I look back on my journey with Ryan, I see a love story that transcended time, distance, and even loss. His strength, kindness, and unwavering love remain etched in my heart, guiding me through each new chapter of my life. Raising Dylan has been both a challenge and a joy, but in his laughter and curiosity, I see glimpses of the man I will always cherish. Together with Linda, we honor Ryan's memory every day, ensuring his legacy lives on in the little boy who carries his spirit. Life has taught me that love is not measured by time but by the depth of the connection we share. Ryan's love will forever be a part of me, a light that shines through even the darkest moments. If you've been touched by this story, please subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales. Thank you for watching.